Why do we conduct classroom observations of teachers? Is it for supervision purposes, for evaluation purposes, for documentation purposes, for assessment and assistance purposes? The correct answer, of course, is that we conduct classroom observations for all of these reasons. Please note that you are not observing for the purposes of evaluation or supervision. You are observing in order to assess components of a teacher's practice in order to help that teacher improve these components of practice. A classroom observation is simply one point in time. It does not allow us to generalize about the teacher's practice. It does not tell us how well or how poorly the teacher does something. It does not allow us to make judgments about the teacher's overall performance. A classroom observation only allows us to answer the question, what is the teacher doing at this particular moment? When you write down your observations, try to follow the structure of this pyramid. The majority, 70% of your comments, should be evidence-based. A quote or a literal description of something you saw or heard to back up this claim. Evidence is based on what the teacher or student said or did. An example of evidence is, the teacher asked the student to come to the front of the room, or the teacher walked around the room. A smaller number, about 20%, of what you write should be claims. A claim is a generalization of practice based on accumulation of evidence. Again, the focus here is on what's empirical, what the teacher said or did. An example of a claim is, the teacher frequently asks students to come to the front of the room, or the teacher often walks around the room. An even smaller amount of what you write should be an interpretation, typically 10%. To interpret is to construe or to explain the sense or intention of someone in a particular way or with respect to a given set of circumstances. An example of an interpretation is, the teacher and students didn't get along, or the students really enjoyed this class. In fact, you don't know if either one of these statements is true. A better alternative, if you feel you must comment on a critical incident, is to turn your interpretation into a claim. The teacher appears angry at students because she yelled at them, or the students appear to enjoy this class because they often raise their hands, or students appear excited to use computers because they work collaboratively and energetically in their groups. Finally, none of what you write should be a judgment. An example of a judgment is, this is an unqualified teacher, or this teacher has no idea what she's doing. Since the purpose of your observation is to help, not judge the teacher, statements like this are not useful. You will be using a classroom observation tool that does contain some degree of qualifying a teacher's practice. However, it's important to note that any instrument, no matter how carefully designed, can contain flaws that may negatively impact an observation. For example, an instrument may have bias. That is, bias resulting from a flaw that's more systematic, either organizational expectations of what should occur in the classroom or instrument design preferences. All of these can impact the instrument design and your observation. Insensitivity. An observation instrument that does not accurately reflect the quality of instruction or the quality of training that a teacher received to conduct the instruction is evidence of something that we call insensitivity. Finally, validity. An instrument may lack validity. There are several types of validity. Face validity is the most common. That is, a demonstration that the items of a test or an instrument are drawn from the domain being measured. In addition to these external instrument design issues, there are particular observer-related issues that can negatively impact or bias an observation. For example, an observer may have assumptions or expectations, that is, preconceptions about what a particular class should look like or what he or she should see. Inattentional blindness or change blindness. Oftentimes, human beings do not perceive objects or events. In fact, we often don't even detect large changes in scenes. Bias or partiality. That is, a particular preference for a certain approach or behavior or a certain person. And finally, observer involvement. If an observer moves away from observer status by interacting with the teacher or making comments to the teacher or interacting or interfering with the class, all of these can negatively impact the classroom observation. To illustrate this issue of change blindness and inattentional blindness, we ask you to go to the following website. This website shows a number of students playing basketball. Your assignment is to count the number of times members of the white-shirted team pass the basketball. Please write down the number of passes that you see and be prepared to discuss this video in your discussion forum. Because of these potentially negative impacts, both observation instrument and observer bias, it's important that we control the quality of observation data that we collect. We will do this in our observations by using 2 observers who will complete 1 observation form after the class. We'll also do this by conducting 2 types of inter-rater or inter-observer reliability. A minimum reliability score is considered to be 85%. Anything below 85% is not reliable. Anything above 85% is reliable. The first test of inter-rater reliability is called the test-retest method. This is best accomplished with video. In the test-retest method, you observe a classroom episode and you score the teaching episode using the observation instrument. Some days later, you observe the same episode again and you score again. If the scoring or rating is reliable, your rate of agreement will be at least 85%. The second is the joint probability of agreement method. This can be done with video or an actual classroom example. This is the method you will use with your partner. You and your colleague will observe the classroom, you'll complete your observation form separately, you'll sit down and then come up with one final score between you. You'll check areas where you agree and disagree. Where you disagree, you discuss, present evidence, and recalibrate your scores so that you can come to some sort of an agreement based on discussion and evidence. Once again, your minimum score of agreement should be 85%. So let's remember, even when all efforts are taken to ensure absolute fairness and lack of error, there will always be some degree of bias or error or uncertainty in observations. This is important to know because what you see in a classroom may not be absolutely true and verifiable. Every measurement has some degree of error. Either the instrument has a flaw, or you've missed something, or the teacher is doing something that she wouldn't normally do in your presence. Every observation has some degree of indeterminacy. Oftentimes what we see is inconclusive. It may be true at that moment, but have no meaning or significance beyond the actual event. Every observation may suffer from what's called a halo effect. This is the tendency of observers to judge someone as being totally good because one aspect of his or her character is good. And finally, any observation may suffer from what's called a Hawthorne effect. Oftentimes people perform better than they normally would simply because they are being observed. As you conduct your observations, keep these thoughts in mind and remember that observations should always be fair, reliable, sensitive, and valid.